Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J. How you doing?
I am doing phenomenal. I
like that.
So phenomenal. And the reason for it, I mean, I just want to just jump right into it. There's a mono red deck in the top 8 of last weekend's Star City Open. Mono red!
Long time coming.
It has been a while. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of sucky / poopy that it wasn't in first place. But, you know, we've got weeks and weeks and months to go for mono red to reach its rightful place in all first places. I speak, of course, of Jonathan Job's mono red aggro deck, 6th place at last weekend's Star City Open. And it is a deck unlike anything we've seen in a while.
Oh, some very, very cool technology here. Very cool technology. This is something that I wrote about actually a little bit a couple weeks ago that kind of springboards off something you and I were talking about regarding using the desert mana base, how you can do this to power up the Eldrazi. And that's something a lot of people have talked about in a variety of ways, obviously, but using the Eldrazi aggro sort of influences to give a nice little touch, like a little extra staying power to whatever strategy. You know, the Eldrazi aggro cards are so good for grinding. And here we see a mono red deck that actually gives up most of the red deck wins aspect. It's not even like holding on to very much of the red aggro strategy. It's got just a little bit, but he's like... I mean, this is like lots of beaters. This is like a very different direction on the idea of incorporating the Eldrazi aggro package into a red aggro deck.
It's like a big red stompy deck almost, right? So
it's one of those Soul Scar Mage decks with almost no way to trigger
it. I was looking at, you know, if you just want to talk about wackadoodle 1-drops, it's just Falcon Wrath Gorger. You know, like the thing on this deck, it's a 24-land red deck, right? And he's got 1-drops, more 1-drops, all the way up to 5-drops. And, you know, just to touch on what you were saying, probably unsurprisingly at the top, he's got Glorybringer 1+2, 2 in the main. I'm sorry, 2+1, 2 in the main, 1 in the sideboard. But the Glorybringer is sharing 5-drop space with 2 copies of Reality Smasher and then 2 copies of Eldrazi Obligator. Obviously, Eldrazi Obligator is typically a 3-drop, but if you pay the 1 and a colorless, then it's a 5-drop. Kind of the kicker on it. And those.
I wanted to touch on that for a second, if you could. But go ahead first. You were saying.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, look, it's a 24-land red deck with a bunch of 1-drops, but it goes up all the way to 5, and it's just big 5 creatures. I don't know. I'm not sure which is the optimal 5-drop for this kind of strategy, but I think it is. This is like. It's really, at least color-wise, it's nothing like we've seen in a long time.
So one of the things that's real interesting about the mix of 2 Glorybringers and 2 Reality Smashers, and by the way, it should be noted, he's got the third of each in the board. Oh, yeah,
in the board.
So one of the things that's so cool about playing a mix of Glorybringers and Reality Smashers is that the way you fight against them is very different. You know, like when you know your opponent is on their 5th turn and they're a Glorybringer deck, well, that's the turn you hold up Grasp of Darkness. And my God, is Reality Smasher a Rude Awakening?
It's right? It's in particular really good against Grasp of Darkness.
Whereas the way that you want to beat Reality Smasher is to commit more creatures to the board. Tap out, play another big threat, and just have more board presence.
Yeah, that's just a really elegant point. So Glorybringer, great against creatures and planeswalkers, right? Reality Smasher, great against removal and faces.
Right. Exactly.
Really good against faces.
They're so exactly the things that are good against one are so exactly wrong against the other. So I think that's a really cool move. That's a really cool move. And both of them having haste really fits in with, I mean, it's not trivial the amount of haste in this deck. Earthshaker Kenra, in addition to On-Crop Crasher and Eldrazi Obligator. This is like, so much haste. And the Hazoret sometimes.
I feel like Earthshaker Kenra is actually the defining card of this deck. I think it's kind of the card that laces it together, right? Like most of these other cards are already available. No?
Nah. No, without question, the thing that laces it together is Ramanup Ruins.
Yeah?
This whole deck, this deck doesn't even need... Don't get me wrong, the Earthshaker Kenra might be good. It might be great. I don't know. But I don't think it's that important. the thing going on with this deck, it might be important in that it's a playable 2-drop, and red has been so short of even like something playable. The real thing going on, in my opinion, is without question Ramanup Ruins. I think Ramanup Ruins is a game changer.
Comes into play untapped, dual land, and finishes off the game, right? This is a creatures deck. If somebody kills all your creatures, Ramanup Ruins is actually, the finisher.
Well, yeah, in this deck, it's like it's a Karplusan Forest for you, right?
Yeah.
Like you're getting you can get red for pain or colorless for free, but instead of some secondary color that you're not actually playing, like green or whatever, obviously it's got colorless as a secondary color, but the fact that you also just get to have this, like, inevitability, this end game, it makes, first of all, you can play so much more land. I mean, playing 24 land in a red aggro deck is a lot easier to do when a bunch of them can sacrifice to do extra shocks at the end of the game to the face. That's pretty potent. And then and the fact that Ramanup Ruins and Sunscorched Desert are both stacking the right way, where they're both just extra face damage, it's so nice because the burn here, he's got a little bit, obviously Magma Spray and Incendiary Flow, and Magma Spray doesn't even go upstairs. But the burn here is very much just a bridge because of the lack of 2-drops.
Yeah.
And
the Sunscorched Desert is great in this deck also, obviously, because it comes into play untapped. He's really not sacrificing very much at all in order to kind of splash this extra utility.
19 red is also not exactly cutting it short or anything.
It's not thin. Like, and 14 red is thin, but
it's worth noting too that Chandra, it plays into this plan so nicely. Both Chandra can be part of the inevitability of more and more and more face damage, but then also Chandra can give you a bunch of extra mana so that you have the potential to actually do, turns where you're like, okay, I guess I'll activate Ramanup Ruins even though I also played a card that same turn. Because it can be expensive to operate the Ruins, particularly once you start sacrificing your deserts.
That's true. I mean, I love the inclusion of Kari Zev, Skyship Raider. Like, that's a card that I always wanted to be good enough, and here we are.
The ability to just I guess get anything on the table that's remotely playable on the second turn is that's been the tough spot for these red aggro decks, and even here there are only 6, and I would venture to say that Kari Zev and Earthshaker Kenra are not exactly near the top of the deck's power, but they just need something, and that's part of the reason to play Soulscar Mage, is that even though Soulscar Mage is not the greatest, because of, obviously there's literally just 3 Magma Sprays, 3 Incendiary Flows, and 2 Chandras, it's at least something. And a 1/2 is a lot more than a 1/1 in this day and age. And then the extra, the -1/-1, the -1/-1 counters, that's real. That makes Magma Spray and Incendiary Flow, actually, more than the sum of the parts. And Magma Spray in particular, being able to trade Magma Spray with big creatures, because there are a lot of decks that just don't have anything worth Magma Spraying. But you just have to play the Magma Spray. And Soulscar Mage gives you so much more value out of those things. And then finally, and this is an important one, the sideboard has a substantial number of Soulscar Mage interactions, and not just in triggering the prowess, but in terms of putting counters on your opponent's stuff. Whether it's a Braid, Magma Spray, Incendiary Flow, Chandra, any of that stuff. Glorybringer. And the Glorybringer, by the way, that's another part of it. Soulscar Mage and Glorybringer is nice. Being able to shrink something before the Glorybringer actually has to do any damage to something blocking it, that's nice.
Yep. I just wanted to note this sideboard that Jonathan played. This is very much like a kind of sideboard that Brian Kibler would have loved. Like he would say, hey, I want to play this many of this card, but I just don't know what distribution I want to play them in, main deck and side. And he'd split them up a little bit. He's like, oh, I'm going to get to 4, right? Just which distribution. And like if you just
Invigorated. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, like he's got like 3 Magma Sprays and 3 Incendiary Flows main deck, and then 1 each in the sideboard. Just like if he's got to play against some creatures that might come back from the graveyard, there's a variety of those. Just more getting more blockers out of the way. He can do that. He can even go up to a Braid, right, for that purpose. Or he can just side those out and add more haste creatures. It's very like a tuning sideboard, not a here's my surgery set.
That's a great way to put it, actually. It really is a tuning sideboard where you are trying to just, it's like you get to metagame against your opponent. It's like more like what the sideboard is supposed to be like,
Yeah. So you were
it's weird. We've gotten so used to like transformational plans and stuff,
Yeah, if this were a Mardu deck from like a month ago, the sideboard would be completely different. Just like all planeswalkers and removal spells. Let's take out all of our small guys, bring in all of our killers, right? And then we're going to go super slow and kill people with a gigantic vehicle or something. But this is very different. Maintains the core strategy. It just refines which cards you draw in which proportions.
Earthshaker Kenra and Kari Zev, in addition to being the 2-drops, are presumably the rationale for Invigorated Rampage in the sideboard. Invigorated Rampage, I mean, who knows? Maybe you just bring it in whenever you want to get funky. But, it is pretty sweet to Invigorated Rampage your Kari Zev after they've triple blocked it or whatever. It's kind of a bummer, though. You can't Earthshaker Kenra Invigorated Rampage, actually. That's too bad. Just because when you choose the target, it has to already be big enough. And so by the time you can actually target it with Invigorated Rampage, the Earthshaker Kenra has to have already locked in a target. That's too bad.
Well, there's 20 other things that you can do with those cards.
Just giving your stuff trample is kind of sweet sometimes too. Like giving 2 different creatures trample. If you get into a standoff or something, or not a standoff, but just creature bogged down creature battle.
What do you think about Thought-Knot Seer 3+1 in this deck?
I don't know. I'm a 4 Thought-Knot Seer guy in general, but once Chandra is part of the equation too, it becomes a lot more believable.
Yeah, I mean, he's got all kinds of 4. He's got...
The thing is, Hazoret, I don't know. I just don't believe in Hazoret the same way.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe this is Hazoret's coming out party.
I don't know, man.
All right, so you said a second ago this is a Soulscar Mage deck where Soulscar Mage had almost no ways to trigger. I would ask you to jump over to the Classic, last weekend's Standard Classic, 4th place deck by Billy Klopf. I wouldn't co-sign this deck to the same degree as a mono red for obvious reasons, but I think I could get behind Billy's deck also. So, blue-red prowess. This is like some kind of Cyto Frankenstein monster, riddle form, tempo. Kind of love it. What do you think about this guy?
This is pure. This is a blue-red prowess deck for somebody who plays modern. This. It's like this is like 4 Soulscar Mage, 4 Stormchaser Mage. Yeah, because Monastery Swift Spear and Goblin Guide aren't legal.
I love this deck. Yeah, it's cool. But I mean,
I would be shocked if you didn't love this deck.
I love it. Man, I just run somebody over. Riddle form. What about that? I don't know about riddle form though.
Crash through in 8 creatures. That is like, I love it. That there.
It doesn't target. You could just burn
it.
Draw a card. Creatures you control gain trample until end of turn.
Oh, you're saying like in a bad. Yeah. I see.
Cycle for R.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And it's also kind of nice because it will proc the riddle form before the trample is assigned. So you can still give the riddle form trample,
Yeah, the riddle form, man, is it... I've never even considered playing riddle form.
Really?
No, I didn't.
Oh, I like riddle form.
It's probably great.
No, I think riddle form is good. Absolutely. I think riddle form is good. So riddle form is like a 2-cost 3/3 flyer that doesn't die to sweepers. Riddleform,
it also fixes your deck if you have a slow draw.
Yeah, it doesn't really come to that much. But yes, Scry 1 is part of the equation. That's part of the backup plan, which is cool. But mostly it's a 2-cost 3/3 flyer that like dodges removal. It's like a smuggler's copter, but it doesn't need a crew.
Well, why would you need to turn it on somehow. But I think that's what the Scry 1 is there for.
Yeah, well, the way you turn it on is an awful lot of casting crash through or shock or whatever.
You just have 29 hitters, right? That's how you turn it on.
Yeah, I don't know. This card seems good to me.
All right. I mean, this is I think this deck seems like a riot to play. Like it. Just, offense, like unsummon. He's pure is the word you used. I love this deck. I love Fevered Visions. That's the thing. Like anything that's getting people in with Fevered Visions, just putting them in a corner and hitting them with Storm Chaser Mage from the sky. I guess Storm Chaser Mage and Riddleform are best buddies, right? Like,
of course,
three toughness flyers in the house.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, man. I think that once you're the person who's signing up for Storm Chaser Mage, you should give a look to Riddleform. At least in standard. Dude, I know you gotta love the refuse to cooperate in the sideboard. 2 copies, refuse to cooperate. That's your jam, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like cooperation. We're not friends, and when I cast Refuse, you're really gonna know that we're not friends. like I mean that. And we talked about that when this card was just first spoiled. Like, this is just a card that this kind of deck has always wanted, right? Like, it's just as big as your thing is, just get you for that much. It's potentially really substantial damage, and this is gonna seem obvious, but the sideboard is kind of a perfect place for it, right? Like, you kind of don't want to have this against a deck full of 1-drops, but you kind of do want to have this against a deck with a fair number of 5-drops.
Oh, see, I think that part of the reason why it's kind of a nice sideboard right now is because of how good it is against Eldrazi ramp decks. There's a variety of Eldrazi ramp decks and then also Emerge. I think this card is just a killer against Wretched Grith, Elder Deep Fiend decks. Like, for instance, there's a 4-color Emerge deck that Zan Side played at, and this is one of the big breakout decks of the weekend. One of the many homes that Champion of Wits found. Champion of Wits, by the way, did not waste any time before just showing up and having a huge impact.
Oh, my God, was I wrong on that one. This guy, he's like 3 different decks or something, all different strategies. He's already there.
Champion of Wits is just so here in Zan's deck, he's using Champion of Wits as part of a prized amalgam Haunted Dead strategy, and being able to discard Haunted Dead or prized amalgam, each one of those, it's like a cantrip to be able to discard it, right? Like, that's what you want. You would do that
exactly what you want.
And so between Vessel of Nascency, Grapple with the Past, and Strategic Plannings now, obviously a new card that found a home, albeit in small numbers, we've got a bunch of extra ways in addition to these Champion of Wits. And one of the things that's so insanely good about Champion of Wits here is that it also gives you a 3-cost body that's perfect for sacrificing to the Elder Deep Fiends.
Yeah, that is just the most obvious thing. I can't believe I didn't see that one. Right? Like, it was made for each other.
Being able to sacrifice Haunted Dead or prized amalgam is so good for Elder Deep Fiend anyway. So all the pieces just start to really fit together, And then when you've got Grim Flare in the mix, Grim Flare is a cool card to turn on turn 3. Being able to play Grim Flare with Champion of Wits. Now, you're not going to turn it on just like straight up naturally, but I guess even just doing it 1 turn ahead of schedule is like pretty great.
I mean, you can go Evolving Wilds, turn 2 Grim Flare, turn 3 Champion of Wits, and then you're not probably there.
But you're 1 short.
Yeah, you're not there.
But being able to have Grim Flare have so many different hits that it can get, and then in terms of like just cards that if you flip them over are effectively putting you ahead on cards, and then all the way down to the one Ishka Nagraf Widow to help make these 4 Traverse the Ulven Wilds go that extra mile.
Yeah,
this is a sweet deck.
I don't think we've ever seen this before, right? Traverse the Ulven Wild into just chaining Elder Deep Fiends, because that's what it's there for.
No.
Like,
yeah, that's part of it. Yeah, that's the main thing. But I also think, like, I mean, I don't know. I think Champion of Wits is so good. You're going to traverse for Champion of Wits sometimes. I think Champion of Wits is just, it looks like a really powerful card to me. But this deck is a great example of one of the spots for Refuse to Cooperate, because if your opponent is going to go ahead and try to Elder Deep Fiend you and you refuse to cooperate,
they're probably dead. Right?
They are probably dead. They're not alive.
Let me tell you about tapping 4 lands.
And remember, this isn't just a deck that maybe they'll have Elder Deep Fiend at the right time. Their plan is to Elder Deep Fiend over and over again, right? So, like, they're flipping through their deck, trying to find Elder Deep Fiends. They're flipping cards into their graveyard and then using Grapple to get them back. They've got 10 tutors in addition to Grapple that are mainly looking for Elder Deep Fiends. This deck plays way more 8-drops than it looks. Like, even though there are only 4 that actually cost 8, this deck is reliably playing multiple 8-drops a game. Refuse to Cooperate is devastating for them. Other spots where I really like the Refuse to Cooperate, in the top 16, just barely out of the top 8. 9th place, Zach Allen with 4 Torrential Gearhulks. 4 Torrential Gearhulks is part of the equation. Actually, no, this isn't even the deck I was thinking of. It's still kind of good against Torrential Gearhulk, though. No, there was a different one that had a bunch of Planeswalkers as well.
I mean, this one's it's just 4 Torrential Gearhulks, Hour of Devastation, 23 land. That's kind of aggressive.
The extra... Yeah, basically any of these decks that just have Torrential Gearhulks and Hour of Devastations and, like, for instance, Kennen Haas, 4 Torrential Gearhulk, 1 Chandra Flamecaller, 3 Hour of Devastation. And then some of these decks with Nicol Bolas and whatnot, it's kind of nice to kind of get somebody for 6 or 7 that way. I
mean, you don't have to tell me twice. Maybe the mono red deck would just play that card even without the buyback.
And then if you want to look over at God, where I can't find the Eldrazi. There was an Eldrazi ramp deck that did well. Where is that one? Or it was doing well, I guess. I don't know.
Well, if we don't find it now, there'll be many weeks of ramping, I think. Especially since I think like Hour of Promise is just one of the most unbelievable cards that I don't think made top 8 this weekend. There is a deck Jerry posted, and it looks like verbatim Jerry's deck. The Blue-White Monument deck that Jonathan Rossum played to second place in the Open. Did you see that one?
Yep.
It's a good week to be named Jonathan in Star City Opens. So this deck is, like I said, it's blue-white instead of mono-white. The centerpiece card is Oketra's Monument. Oketra's Monument is a 3 casting cost artifact that makes white creatures cheaper, and when you cast white creatures, you or any creatures, you make white 1/1 creatures. Instead of being mono-white, which a lot of the Oketra's Monument decks in the past were, Jerry suggested a blue-white version, which splashes for Spell Queller and Cloud Blazer. Now, Spell Queller and Cloud Blazer are, in fact, still white creatures, but they have a tinge of the blue to them. And, just go for very, very substantial value. And then there's just tons and tons of incidental card advantage of this deck. So, obviously, Cloud Blazer is just a value machine, and it's also got Bygone Bishop for additional card advantage.
Yeah, there's a couple. It looks like Jonathan made a couple tweaks to Jerry's list, but this is like 71 the same or 72 the same. So he did add the 4th handwear militia captain. He's got in his sideboard. He did end up fitting in a couple nimble obstructionists, which is an idea Jerry had floated in the article, but didn't actually suggest how to do it yet.
Nimble obstructionist is. I mean, this card is going to be. It is going to be heavily played, I think, in older formats at some point, right? We just haven't seen it yet.
I think it's very promising. What do you think about the Temer energy deck that Jason Morgan used to top 8? This is a red-green, the Glorybringer style of red-green, the like playing with Servant of the Conduits and whatnot, but not really about the pump spells, more just like lots of good cards. But then he splashes blue for Champion of Wits, and then obviously Rogue Refiner. And then he also even has one Whirler Virtuoso in here. Yeah,
so when I said I had missed some bit on Champion of Wits and it was played in a variety of different archetypes, this is one of the ones I was thinking of. I would not have, prior to the week starting, predicted that you were going to have a successful Temer Energy creature deck that cut a Bristling Hydra and splashed for Champion of Wits, right? Like it's just not in my range, right? Like Bristling Hydra seems like,
I don't know, man. I don't know why, like 2/2. So like, okay, so playing with a 2/1 draw card, you'd be like, I don't know if 2/1 draw card is that good because like look at Rogue Refiner, and obviously Rogue Refiner is great, but the card you're drawing is a 0 mana Careful Study, and then what's more, you even have an Eternalize ability, and the Eternalize ability is a big part of the power. It's actually very, very real. Even in a deck like this, with only 21 land, you've got 4 Attune with Ether, you've got 4 Servant of the Conduit. Some of these Champion of Wit decks are going to have stuff like Chandra or whatever, but when the game starts stalling out, the fact that you just for free have a draw 4 in your graveyard that also puts a board presence down, it's like an opportunity. But one of the cards is a 1 mana 4/4. Now you have to discard 2 cards, but I mean
it's fixing your hand at that point.
And what's more, you can play Champion of Wits. Unlike the Kenra, you don't have to target with this anything. So like when you play Champion of Wits, you can respond to the trigger by pumping Champion of Wits with Ronus to draw 2 extra cards if you want.
Yeah. So if you look at this deck. I'm just saying I'm surprised that there's only 3 Bristling Hydra. When I lose to Temer Energy or red-green
energy, I agree with you. I would play 4 Bristling Hydra without question.
Usually, like, the thing I'm going on in my head is, like, I can pull this game out if I play the next 3 turns perfectly as long as he doesn't draw another Bristling... Oh, there it is. I can't beat 2.
I wouldn't cut the Bristling Hydra, personally.
I mean, even just from a curve perspective, right? You've got 3 Bristling Hydra, but then like 1 Whirler Virtuoso, 2 Ronus, and 4 Glorybringer. That just seems a little oblong to me.
If you found room for the 4th Glorybringer, I don't know how you don't have the 4th Bristling Hydra, but it's an easy add.
But this is we glossed over it in some other decks already, but this is a 3 Abrade main deck.
I love it.
Lots of removal in this deck. Actually, this is an unusual amount, I think, right? We don't typically see
definitely.
Even 8
I think,
and this is
I was going to say, I think 6 is like the mode, but like 6, 7, or 8 all show up. We have not yet seen 9.
Here's 9. So.
Right, and that's a big change. And with 4 Glorybringers too, that's like extra removal. One of the things I love about Glorybringer right now is that I think there's going to be a very substantial number of people who are cutting Harness Lightnings from their deck for Abrades. Abrade is a tough way to do it against Glorybringer.
It is a tough way to do it against Glorybringer alone. It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Harness Lightning.
So 27th place. Not the highest thing. Looks like a little bit of a loss at the end there, but
27th place and like 9th place
fantastic.
are pretty close, right? In these events.
So 27th place, top 32 finish, Jonathan Benson, green-red ramp. So a couple cool things going on here. So it is a Hour of Promise deck, but there's a whole bunch that is made possible because of Hour of Promise. So he starts with the traditional, I'm playing World Breakers and Uamogs, blah, 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 right? And he stays away from stuff like 5-drop Nissa or any of the other stuff because Hour of Promise is just such a good 5-drop. And, of course, Hour of Promise going to search up the Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, which in this case he's actually playing 4. And then he only has to play 1 Sanctum of Ugin to get a lot of extra mileage out of it because of 4 Hour of Promise and 2 Shefet Monitor, giving him tons of ways to access it. So then, in addition to Hour of Promise, he's got to support it with a bunch of deserts, right? So he's got Ramanup Ruins in here too, in addition to the Hashepa Oasis. And he can only play 2 Ramanup Ruins because at a certain point you just need to have lands that make green mana, you know? But one thing I thought was interesting is he did choose to use one of his discretionary spots on a Scavenger Grounds, which is the land that you can pay 2. You can tap it for a colorless, or you can tap it and pay 2 to exile all cards from all graveyards. So Scavenger Grounds in a format with, like, look at everybody's decks. I mean, the zombie deck, obviously tons of graveyard stuff.
Yeah, zombie decks came back substantially this week.
Mardu has Scrap Heap Scrounger, of course, and sometimes, Cut to Ribbons. And then, obviously, the fact that you can just lock out Torrential Gearhulks at will, uncounterable, like, that's pretty sick right there, right? I mean, they get the 5/6, but they don't get the Snapcaster ability. And the ability to turn, like, just to get a little bit of extra value against people's cards like Refuse to Cooperate or Never Return or Commit to Memory or whatever. And then it can counter an Ishkana Graph Widow, activate, the trigger, or any kind of delirium thing. If you counter you can turn people's Traverse the Ulven Wilds off at will. And he's actually not playing Traverse because of how strong Scavenger Grounds is. And so, among other reasons, but I mean, he's playing Oath of Nissa instead, but it's kind of sweet that he gets to still do his thing, and he gets to shut off everybody else's traverses.
That is sweet.
And that's not even counting the, like, incidental random, sometimes you'll stop a Reanimator or some crazy stuff like that.
Like real card-for-card interactions, not just kind of quality interactions.
And then, in addition to the whole desert thing, the desert thing gives him a whole bunch of sources of colorless mana. And so, to that end, he actually just plays Matter Reshaper for value.
Yeah, I love it.
And Warping Whale.
What do you think about Druid of the Cowl, though?
Oh,
2
yeah,
copies.
I like Druid of the Cowl.
You like it?
Big fan. Big fan. I think once you're playing Kozilek's Return, Druid of the Cowl is the 2-drop of choice. And in a world of Magma Sprays, there's extra reason to be interested. My only thing is that I wouldn't hate playing a 3rd copy of Druid of the Cowl.
I wouldn't hate playing a 4th copy.
You could. I hate drawing 2 of them, though.
Well,
they're so bad when you don't They're so bad when you don't have them in your opener.
Well, I just argue that Druid of the Cowl is pretty good into ramping into Shefet Monitor on turn 3. Although there's only 2 copies in this deck. And you could do stuff like a 3 and a 1, stuff like that, like Oath of Nissa and Beneath the Sands in the same turn.
Well, Chandra's a great turn 3, obviously.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm just talking about the non-ridiculous 3s.
So the problem with ramping into Chandra is that you're actually not – it's not trivial to cast Chandra on turn 3. Because of the mix of lands that you need to have, and some of them are tapped, and some of them it's not always the easiest until you've ramped one time. Now, part of the reason he's only playing 2 Druid of the Cowls is because he's supporting 3 Beneath the Sands, because the curve that he really wants is a turn 3 Beneath the Sands into a turn 4 Hour of Promise. Now, Hour of Promise is the real powerhouse, and getting to play Hour of Promise reliably a turn early is worth a lot. If you play Druid of the Cowl, it can be really unfortunate sometimes that Fatal Push just undoes that, And then he's also relying on Beneath the Sands to help fix his red to get that second red for Chandra. And then finally, Beneath the Sands keeps the gas coming later, of course, and that's something we talked about last week. But here we're seeing it, already put to good use.
Yeah, he's pretty subtly reliant on Beneath the Sands. Yes, small point. There's only 2 mountains in this deck. Like, obviously, he's got some other sources of red, but you think about which cards you can hunt for. There's only 2 copies of mountain.
Yeah, and it's not an accident. Having 2 mountains and 2 Ramanup ruins, very intentional, very on purpose. So it's really nice to be able to go Hour of Promise, go get 2 Ramanup ruins to trigger your being able to actually get the zombies to help block, and then be sure you've got the red mana for Hour of Devastation. And the same is true with Beneath the Sands. Even if you've drawn one of your mountains already, you really want to be able to Beneath the Sands for the other one, so that when you untop on turn 4, you can cast Hour of Devastation and really get paid. And that's another reason to play Beneath the Sands instead of just being all in on Druid of the Cowl,
Yeah, I'd actually give a little advice on playing this deck, which is that if you see this deck and you're like, oh, this deck is really different, it's cool, it's got like a bunch of functionality that I haven't done yet, that's good and bad. The reason I'd say that is you should practice your library manipulation. The old rule that we had is that whenever you cast library manipulation, whether it's a Beneath the Sands or a Ponder or a Brainstorm, you have the opportunity to make a choice, and the choice can either bring you closer or further away from victory. One of the most common ways to lose when playing a mana hunting ramp deck is to run out of the thing that you're trying to get, or to plan your turn wrong. Like, say, I can't even tell you how many times I've lost, at least in playtesting, whether or not I've lost. I must have lost in tournaments this way too, where you don't sequence your basics correctly because it's a question of like hunting for which basic on which turn, and then being reliant on being able to tap that basic in the future. If you look specifically at this deck, it's got 3 copies of Beneath the Sands and 2 copies of Sheffet Monitor. Well, Beneath the Sands can get Forest or Mountain. There's 6 total of those, right? But Sheffet Monitor can get Forest or Mountain, or it can get any of the deserts, right? So it's just, which ones you get, what resource is scarce, and then also there's very subtle things that that can either gain or lose value for you. For example, if you have one of these turns where you're going to cast some sort of mana hunting card and then get a land and then play it all in the same turn, just which order you do searches in consecutive turns can do something as trivial seeming as saving you a single point of life, right? And all that stuff, if you're going to play hundreds of games of Magic, adds up.
Oh, so actually that brings up a good point. Let's say that you've got a mountain and a forest, and you're trying to decide which one are you going to play on turn 4. And you've got in your hand Sheffet Monitor and Hour of Devastation. You can actually do some pretty sneaky stuff if you choose to play your forest. Hold the mountain in your hand so that you're showing 0 red. Your opponent overcommits. You just have 4 land in play, none of which are red. You cycle the Sheffet Monitor, put a desert into play that's a Ramanup Ruins or Mountain, whatever, and then untap, drop your Mountain, and then boom, Hour of Devastation out of nowhere. Like Hour of Devastation from 0 red showing. Which is not the exact same of the running out thing, but it's another sequencing.
Yeah, even just the situation that you described a second ago, if you think about, like, what's a scarce resource, and you're like, well, in playtesting, a scarce resource is going to be desert versus basic, right? And you're like, well, I'm going to go get Ramanup Ruins because I can get Ramanup Ruins with Sheffet Monitor, and, when you have a mountain in your hand, for sake of argument. But I already have a mountain, so I don't need to get mountain. But if you're in a situation like that, and then you're going to cast a double red Hour of Devastation the following turn, maybe it's right to get mountain because it'll save you a point of life, right? That's a possibility, versus getting Ramanup Ruins, which costs you a point of life to when you tap for red. And it's just like, I think that's the kind of thing that people say, well, I'm going to go into this routine because typically I'm going to get Mountain with Beneath the Sands, and I'm typically going to get Deserts with Sheffet Monitor. But when you're in the context of the game, the ability to save yourself a life point might be worth, some future amount of flexibility, because you could still probably get a forest with Beneath the Sands if you rip it later. Or the great thing about Beneath the Sands in particular is if you don't want to search, you don't have to. You just get rid of it.
So what do you think of Michael Hamilton's 4-color control deck that he used to take down the trophy?
All right, so I'm going to jump over there. I think that nothing looks better than victory. That's where I'd start.
And this is really a Jeskai deck, though. Just, let's call a spade for a spade. This is a Jeskai deck. Nicol Bolas, however, just... of course you just win the tournament by splashing Nicol Bolas in your Jeskai deck. Nicol Bolas with a first-place finish week 1.
So I first saw this deck, and I'm like, 2 copies of Dovin Bond main deck, and there's 2 creatures, and I jumped my eyes to the creatures, and I was just like, Torrential Gearhulk and Linvala. I guess if you're in a Hiri deck, 1 Linvala, and you're only playing 2 creatures, 1 Linvala's got to be in your mix. But where's Horse Tribal, Patrick? There's 2 Dovin Bonds in this deck. This deck's screaming for Horse Tribal. No?
Nah.
No. I think this deck is cool.
Nah, this deck needs to have its only creatures have 1/8/7. Have enters the battlefield triggers.
Yeah, I mean, agree that like Linvala and Nahir in like a low creature deck, Linvala and Nahiri are made to get for peanut butter and chocolate, right? Like those guys are.
And Torrential Gearhulk, it's hard to go wrong with Torrential Gearhulk as 1 in the mix.
Well, the one way you can go wrong with it is by playing 1 instead of 4, but we don't have to say that.
So this deck gets its black mana from 4 Aether Hubs and one Fetid Pools. Because by the time you're casting Nicol Bolas, you've had some time to look through, your deck a little bit. Maybe cycle a cast out here or there, cycle a sensor. But this is a deck that's even playing 27 land, in addition to having 2 cast out, 2 sensor, 4 Glimmer of Genius, and 3 Supreme Will. And I say Supreme Will and Glimmer of Genius not jokingly. You got to find that black mana somehow. Nicol Bolas needs to get paid.
I mean, you just got to keep the flow going, right? Like, I just remember Neil Reeves talking to me about winning this blue on blue mirror at U.S. Nationals one year, where he was super behind. His opponent is just like completely outdrawn him, but he managed to win because Neil used all of his resources to keep hitting land drops. The other guy he had better card quality, but he choked up. If you're going to play cards as expensive as Nicol Bolas while trying to defend yourself with, Supreme Will is a counterspell. It costs 3 mana. Stuff like this, or you just got to keep hitting your land drops. It's the minimum.
Yeah. And you've got stuff like Nicol Bolas and Pull that can really help catch you up.
I love the return of Pull, of course.
Yeah. So what do you think about the this take on zombies, which is nothing too revolutionary or anything, but it does have 1 Kalitas main deck, and then it does feature a couple of copies of Voldaren Pariah in the sideboard. You like Voldaren Pariah?
I love Voldaren Pariah, but I didn't really love it that much in zombies. I liked it in black-red. I don't know. This deck is my honest assessment when I went over the top 8s. This wasn't one that I dwelled a lot on. Not with 4-color control and mono red, etc. All
right. Well, then what about
attention?
What about the black-green energy deck that Steven Dickman used to finish top 4, and notably featuring a pair of Dream Stealers in the main deck?
My eyes went exactly the same place. So, first of all, the black-green decks they're just wicked. If you get caught behind them, because of Winding Constrictor and the ability to just grab super explosive draws out of that. Dream Stealer is the newbie. I think that it's a kind of card that will excel in the right contexts, right? Like a lot of actually, if we think about it, even the Temer Energy deck was kind of heavy on creature removal.
Yeah.
This is a great grinding card, though. Like, somebody who's not great at point removal, and then maybe if you can use your Fatal Pushes and Grasps to kind of keep their creature count low enough that Menace is online, it's a pretty powerful card.
It's it's also it's an interesting one to buff if you put any kind of like +1/+1 counters on it. The curve of turn 2 Dreamstealer into turn 3 Nissa or Rishkar, that's pretty sick.
So I actually think that the thing that's real interesting about this deck is that, did somebody drop Steven Dickman a note, right? Like before the tournament starts, like, hey, the whole metagame, we're gonna take a left turn. What do you mean by that? Well, black-green decks have been going in one or two directions the last couple of months, but I just want you to know something. It's okay. It's okay to play Kalida's main deck again. It's okay to run this new card, Dreamsteal. And while you're at it, why don't you just jam 6 Planeswalkers into your deck? Like, what? Nobody's done this in months. Right? It's all been about, like, Winding Constrictors, Rishkar Pima Renegade, like, splaying out Verdur's Gearhulk tokens, but yeah, this is completely, it's like 2016 all over again.
So now, what do you like better, this green-black energy deck or the green-black energy deck that Cameron 2C, who finished 21st, used? His notable new technology, and this is another green-black energy with +1/+1 counters of sorts, but he doesn't have any Planeswalkers. He's got stuff like, and he doesn't have the Dreamstealer. He's got Bristling Hydra, Glint Sleeve Siphoner, that kind of jam, Longtusk, Blinding Constrictor, all that usual stuff. But then he's got Driven to Despair.
We talked about Driven to Despair. I think that I much prefer the 21st place deck. I mean, first of all, the black-green deck, I don't know. It's not fair to say that it was under the radar, because it was, even if it was like in third place, it's like a, pretty popular macro archetype, but it is so capable of applying heavy pressure quickly. And I think that that's an underappreciated aspect of the deck, because no matter which version of black-green, they have so much more flexibility than most of the other decks. But this deck, man, Bristling Hydra, Verdur's Gearhulk, if you've got the Winding Constrictor, oftentimes if you don't, you just make life so miserable for the opponent, or they have to have the right stuff on, like, right then and there. They've got to have the point removal spell. They've got to have the counter spell. You're basically going to combo kill them. Like, Verdur's Gearhulk Winding Constrictor is dumb if you've ever been,
Well, so Driven to Failure as part of the, range of dumb draws, there's going to be some spots where, like, picture on turn 4, you just go Driven to Failure,
Driven to Despair, yeah?
I'm sorry, yeah, Driven to Despair, my Glint Sleeve Siphoners, or whatever, right? Like, being able to, like, just real quick, if you happen to just catch them, like, for instance, picture on turn, this is kind of just Magical Christmas Land or whatever, but picture on turn 2 you played a 2-drop, turn 3 you played a 2-drop, and then on your opponent's end step you Fatal Push one of their creatures. They might not be able to block your Glint Sleeve Siphoners anyway because of Menace. And being able to just real quick surprise, here, I drew 2 extra cards and you discard 2 cards. I mean, heaven forbid you knock the last card out of their hand. But this is like an interesting dimension to have access to. And if you're playing Driven to Despair in one of the other types of green-black decks, like, I think it's even got even more potential in some kind of a deck that uses a delirium plan. Because when you can use Driven to Despair, when you're getting free despairs, Despair. When you're getting free despairs from stuff like Grimflare or Grapple with the Past, Liliana's Self-Mill, any of that action, or if you're just discarding Driven to Despair to, like, a Champion of Wits, those are just, like, free cards. And then when you actually, like, if you have, like, Ishkan, a Graph Widow, you might randomly just be able to Mind Twist somebody out of nowhere.
Oh, my God. Ishkan, a Graph Widow Despair.
Yeah. I think Driven to Despair is That's one. Don't sleep on that one. Don't sleep on that one.
I kind of want to have 4 now.
Dude, I think Driven to Despair is sweet. It gets where it has diminishing returns. It does get a little bit worse if you draw too many of them.
If you despair twice,
but see, that's actually one of the things that's so great about Champion of Wits. Champion of Wits makes it a lot easier to go all in on the crazy stuff. You know, it's like you can take some more chances because of just how much Champion of Wits is going to smooth out your draws and put it to use somehow.
So this deck's a little heavy on mana, right? So it's 22 lands plus 4 attuned with Aether. It's a little heavier on mana than we typically see.
It is. But I don't know. He's even got another land in the sideboard presumably for transforming a little bit. You know, doing the classic, get a little more mid-rangey.
Yeah, I think but
that's a lot of mana.
Just to pump up Ronus and maybe cast both sides of Driven to Despair in one turn. He wants a little bit of a mana cushion.
Did you see the 5-color Planeswalker Energy hybrid? Todd Stevens playing a mix. It's kind of it's 35th, but it's like a Temer energy deck. You know, like a Longtusk Cub, Glorybringer, Rogue Refiner, Beatdown, that sort of thing. Whirler Virtuoso, that whole thing. But then he just also has Nicol Bolas God-Pharaohs.
Nicol Bolas is a big man. I think this deck is really cool. I love the decks that can put pressure on you or just kind of really take advantage of their early game mana. This deck's got 2-drops and 3-drops, and really substantial 2-drops between Longtusk Cub and Server of the Conduit. And then they kind of get the opponent to think a certain way. Or like, oh, I'm playing against creatures, I'm playing mid-range creatures, I'm playing against an archetype. They might assign an archetype name to what you're playing, and then wham bam out of nowhere, Nahiri or Nicol Bolas, and they're like, "Whoa, I didn't expect that," and then you just destroy them because they don't have the right cards.
So part of what I think is so clever about this one is that he gets to splash Nicol Bolas trivial. His only land that casts Nicol Bolas are 4 Aether Hubs. He was going to play those anyway.
Raphael Levy, right? I mean,
no. It's not though, because Raph only had 4 Oath of Nissa. This deck has 4 Aether Hub, 4 Oath of Nissa, 4 Servant of the Conduit. It's actually very easy for this deck to cast Nicol Bolas. It's super easy. It's much easier in this deck than it is in the first place deck. Nicol Bolas being so easy, though, that's only part of the equation. Part of what's so clever about Nicol Bolas in this deck uses Nicol Bolas very differently than most of the other decks. So the other decks are playing Nicol Bolas with a much bigger split between, which modes you're using of the card. You're mind twisting them, you're toming, you're doing all this stuff. Nicol Bolas here is going upstairs. This is 7.
So I don't know if we talked about this. So Nicol Bolas starts on 7, right? And for -12 is his alleged ultimate. But you could just go 21 damage, right, if you went -12 by force. Right?
Yeah. All I'm saying is that this deck with all these Longtusk Cubs, Rogue Refiners, Whirler Virtuosos, Glorybringers, Hydras, all these things, this is a deck that can put together 13 damage.
Oh, yeah.
So you just drop Nicol Bolas and you do 7, and it's the last 7. Even if it's not, like the ability to drop Nicol Bolas and then just have a Nicol Bolas in play, I mean, I just think that this is such a dope finisher. This is like a PS Demonfire You.
Oh, yeah. I think that Nicol Bolas might have just a place, with all of these kind of Aether Hubs or fixing where it's just your 7 casting costs deal 7 card, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes, that's what I'm saying, is that it's a 7 cost. It's more efficient of a finisher than Banefire or Demonfire, but then it also has 17 other things the card can do.
Oh, yeah, by the way, if you can, contest this or gain life from a renewed faith or something, I've still got Nicol Bolas in play.
Right. So very, very, very good weekend for Nicol Bolas, who is definitely surpassing any of the doubters' expectations and proving himself worthy of being the top dog.
Just once again in Todd Stevens' deck, 3 Fevered Visions in the sideboard, along with 2 Tireless Trackers at the 3. And 2 Radiant Flames, actually. Look at that 3. It's like 3 completely different 3 casting cost sideboard cards in this deck. Like, Value Beater, anti-control card drawer, anti-go wide sweeper. It's a different world.
Actually, if we could talk about one more, John Pellman's Sultai Delirium deck that he finished 47th with had a couple of pretty cool innovations, and I think that there's some room for this deck to pick up a couple more. So he's got 3 copies of Amit Eternal, and he's got the Scarab God. So first of all, what do you think about Amit Eternal and the Scarab God?
Well, so Amit Eternal is a 2 and a B for a 5/5 creature with Afflict 3. It's got like a lot of problems with its -1/-1, but then it can take all the -1/-1 off when you can attack somebody successfully with it. I think that card is great, and I think it's in.
I was going to say, last week you were singing the praises and I was doubting, and it looks like you might have got the better of it on this one.
I think it's in particular great in a deck full of point removal, which this deck is, right? So
Fatal Pushes, Grasp, Murder, Never Return, all that.
If you can get in with the Amit Eternal, then you can remove all the -1/-1 counters, and at some point the opponent might not be able to defend himself, or might not be able to be putting -1/-1 counters on it anyway. I don't know. What are you thinking about with Amit Eternal, specifically with the Scarab God? Now, obviously, there's some superficial.
No, just these are the 2 new cards he's using.
Oh, I see.
They're separate. They're separate discussions, but I think that the Amit Eternal is a little bit more self-contained. Like, it's just a sweet card in a deck with a bunch of point removal. And it's also nice if you're just very aggressive, and Grim Flayer and Mindrack Demon appreciate the extra aggression. The Scarab God, however, only blue card in the deck.
Yeah, I'm a little scratching the head on this one. That's an odd splash to me.
I love it.
And also green for Grapple the Past is a little bit of an odd splash for me. Obviously, there's some
no. There's a lot of green. No. Traverse the Ulvenwild is the reason he's green. This is a Traverse the Ulvenwild Ishkana Graph Widow deck.
Oh, no. I apologize. I think that I didn't state my idea very well. I think that Grapple the Past is kind of an odd card to play in this strategy. I don't know. I guess it's an instant. That's good.
Yeah, I think part of it is you need to have some instants, but part of it is that he really does want to just giant growth his Grim Flayers, his Mindrack Demons. He wants to make sure Ishkana is actually reliable, because this is a deck that, even though it has a bunch of point removal, it's 2 ticks slower than some of the other the aggressive decks in general. And then I think this is a deck that really wants to be able to have at least a few extra options for how to get some of its bullets. It's got 1 Noxious Gearhulk, 1 Tireless Tracker, 1 Gonti, 1 Kalitas, 1 the Scarab God, 1 Island. This is a deck that really does want to have options that aren't just randomly flipped over, where you're like, oh, shoot. I Liliana milled, and I guess I milled my only Island. That's part of the equation, but it's kind of nice having a few extra looks at how to get out of this.
Yep.
And the thing I love so much about the Scarab God, which, on the creatures, by the way, it's not like if you accidentally flip one of your bullets, that's it, because you still have all these Lilianas, too. But the Scarab God is such a great endgame. This is the Emrakul of sorts. It's not the same. It's nowhere near as high, but you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, yes, we have Ishkana Graph Widow. Yes, we go even higher to Noxious Gearhulk. The Scarab God is much higher than Noxious Gearhulk. Like, the Scarab God is a dope 9-drop.
Well, he's not going anywhere, right? Or not for very long.
Well, it's also at once you can play it as a 9-drop, it has haste effectively, so you can go the Scarab God. I'll immediately get back Ishkan Graph Widow, and then you just are dominating the board. That's just an enormous board presence.
But the way you're talking about it, I want to play more than one.
No, you have Force Reverse, and then you also have all this other stuff too. Grapple and Self Mill and blah blah blah. Liliana's. I'm just saying that the first Scarab God is a card that a lot of decks I think should be looking at, because I think the Scarab, if you're the sort of deck that can access a 9-drop, and you don't have to play it as a 9-drop.
Well, it's also a fine 5.
It's a totally fine 5-drop. It's a totally fine 5-drop. It's good against Grasp. It's doesn't die. It's a very resilient threat. I think it's defensible to play more. I just think the first one is more than half the battle.
So things that I loved and hated about this deck. Hated the murder. What do you think about the 1 murder?
I'm not the biggest murder guy.
Again, I don't like the murder.
I don't like it right now either. I would Dissenter's Deliverance instead of murder, I think.
I would agree with you. I think Dissenter's Deliverance is a fine, actually even like better than replacement value on the murder. But the other one I think is, what's the one that's you and 3 to events or something, and then you can commit to memory. I would commit to memory before I murdered in this deck. Is that insane? Just for that 1 slot.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, I wouldn't commit to memory.
But you know what? That's the thing I don't like about the deck. The thing I love the most about this deck is the sideboard. So this is a sideboard. It's got 2 copies of Gifted Aetherborn, which I love that creature. But it's like mostly singletons. He's got like 1 Manglehorn, 1 Appetite for the Unnatural, 1 Gonti, 1 Kalitas. So he's got a bunch of bullets that he can traverse the Uvenwald for after sideboarding that do specific things like mess with the graveyard or kill artifacts. And then, just a bunch of tuning, right? So if he's playing against combo or control, maybe creature poor decks or small creature poor decks, you can add a bunch of discard. Or if he's playing against go wide, he can add a bunch of Yahenni's Expertise.
And Yahenni's Expertise is actually, this is one of the better Yahenni's Expertise decks we've seen in Standard.
Oh, I agree.
The fact that he put down Amit Eternal or Grim Flare or Liliana the Last Hope, those are so many awesome, both, preludes to Yahenni's Expertise or follow-ups.
Yeah,
being able to... I love when you can do it both ways, and with nothing but high-quality cards. And Amit Eternal.
I vehemently agree with you, Patrick. We often go over top 8 deck lists from the previous weekend on this podcast, but I think I am more excited about the variety, different kinds of decks, utilization of new cards, different strategies, different directions this week than I have been in a long time for Standard. Yes, there were some Mardu-ish decks or whatever, or some Temer energy decks, which we'd seen.
Yeah, but 0 Mardu in the top 8 also.
Yeah, but they were interspersed. We went as deep as 47 looking at a deck just now. But it's like a whole new day. We've had other rotations where a new set came in and the top of the metagame was eerily similar to what it was a week earlier.
But this was
not the case this time.
Radically different. Not even sort of similar. This was 8 totally different archetypes.
And cool stuff. Man, cool
Nicol Bolas, Monument, The Return of Elder Deep Fiend, Temer Energy, Zombies, Red Aggro.
Red Prowess.
I guess there were 2. Okay, fair enough, Jerry's Jerry. There were 2 different white-blue decks.
Yeah, but Blue-Red Prowess Burn, I mean, that's not an entirely new strategy, but it's one that we haven't seen in Standard in, 16 months or something. It's very, very happy with the initial results here, and I cannot wait to see what happens at the Pro Tour.
Me neither, man. Me neither.
All right. We're Top Level Podcast. I'm Michael J. Flores.
Patrick Chapin.
You can reach us lots of places on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on our website, and on Patreon. This week I'd like to shout out to Jethro Harrop. Thank you, Jethro.
Yeah, thank you, Jethro.
Yep. See you next week.
See you next week, buddy.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault